Hi, everybody. This is Ernie Labby here from Intellichief. It's about 2 o'clock. Thank you for joining. We're just going to give everybody else a couple of minutes. So we'll plan on starting at 2 minutes after. Thank you. For anybody that just joined, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes here, or a couple of seconds, actually. So just wait a moment or two more to see if we can get everybody else a chance to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, so this is Ernie Labby from Intellichief. We're ready to get started on our webinar here for workflows and document automation. So it's about 2 after 2, and looks like we've got a good mix of existing Intellichief customers and prospects. And so welcome you all, and I hope you get a lot of information out of this. So let's dive in. If I can get my screen here. Here we go. All right, so here's what we're going to cover today. So a little bit about what and who Intellichief is, some overviews on how our workflow processes and our product can help you improve your business. We're going to do a live workflow demo, and then we'll wrap up with any questions that you may have. Okay, so first, what is Intellichief? So first, kind of how do we get our name? So if you think about Intellichief, it was really founded on the concept of providing intelligence for chief executives. So we were founded in 2002 and have been shipping product right along. So Intellichief is an enterprise content management system. So our solution is meant to integrate with a multitude of ERPs and business systems. We support any number of business processes like accounts payable, purchasing and receiving, accounts receivable, human resources. Basically, if you have a business process and documentation that goes along with it, we have the ability to assist you in storing and automating that process. So we're not just a single point solution, say just for AP or just for AR. We're here for you and for your entire enterprise. So who is Intellichief? So our worldwide headquarters is in Tampa, Florida. That's predominantly where our finance, sales, marketing are located. And then our North American headquarters is in Mansfield, and that's where I'm located. That's really our tech support, professional services, and development center. We are an Oracle Gold partner. And we have hundreds of customers. And for those of you on the call, thank you. And for you prospects, hopefully this will help you in your decision-making process with Intellichief. We have lots of experience both from development and professional services across the company. We're able to assist you in using that experience to help you put best practices into place as you deploy Intellichief. And here's a sample of some of our customers that are happily using Intellichief. So some of these names, hopefully you're able to recognize. So this is me. So I guess this is probably the best picture they could find of me, but at any time, if you'd like to get a hold of me, there's my office number as well as my email address. I'd be happy to take any questions directly from you after this session. Just feel free to give me a call or send me an email. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping. So you see our webinar panel on the right of your screen. You have the ability to send questions in, and we'll try to get to those questions at the end of the session. And also here, you can send those questions either privately or you can open it up for everybody to see. So with that, let's talk a little bit about Intellichief Workflow. So our goal with our workflow is to work seamlessly with ECM and to also integrate with your business systems. So the goal in our workflow is to help lower operating costs. So what does that really mean? So, on one hand, it could be very simple as assisting with workflow in automating repetitive tasks that your team is doing. So they're not spending as much time on a particular document. Or if you think about the AP process, how much time employees are spending keying in invoices into the ERP versus using the Intellichief solution in order to automate that process. With automation comes the ability to then increase the efficiency, not only of the people, but also utilizing the workflow to just improve the efficiency of the overall process, albeit as an example, being able to ensure that the right process is followed every single time associated with what your business rules are. And that goes really into greater accuracy. The more that we can automate the process, we can validate what's being put in, we can check for errors automatically for you, means that by the time that we're, again, integrating with the business system, we're going to make sure that we're providing that business system exactly what it expects, or for your users, they're looking at the exact data that they expect to look at. Okay, so when we're talking about our workflow, this is really kind of the start of it, is to understand how do you start. So one of the ways is you can sort of see the graphic here on the right of the different areas that we've had customers build automation around in our product, but you really have to think and identify what business process you're trying to automate. Think about the documents that are involved in the process. Talk to the users or the business process owners. Understand a bit more about the process. Is it an efficient process? If not, there's an opportunity to investigate and process improvement through Intellichief by automating that process, but also maybe making it more efficient in adding more steps, automated steps, putting more validations into the process that your users would have to do manually. Once you have sort of those questions answered, then it's really time to just start to design the automated approach with Intellichief. And really what I stress here is making sure that you have a plan. So it's really very best to document your approach. So, again, what are you trying to automate? Who's involved in the process? What documents are involved? What's important in that process that you need to automate? And I just scratch some of this information down, even when I'm building demo workflows. It's always good to know where you're starting from and to know what you want it to do, so that way, as you're building it, and certainly as you're testing it, you can validate that you've built exactly what you expected to build and it meets your business users' requirements. So from an Intellichief perspective, what do you need? So first and foremost, workflow is not just a standalone thing, right? It's involved with all of the other aspects of Intellichief. So you need to know what document types or DPPs are going to be involved, what index fields are required for those document types, but also in the workflow. So if you think about it, if one of the steps you want in your workflow process is to validate data or go back to a business system to collect data, you have to have those index fields kind of in mind that you want to utilize. Another piece are inboxes. So inboxes are where the user interacts with the workflow in a manual, when a manual activity is being taken. So for instance, if you route a document to somebody to approve, it'll go into their inbox in Intellichief, and from there that they can take an action. Your users have to have adequate permissions in Intellichief, both for the documents and for the inboxes. And then lastly, you have to have a method to capture the document. So how is the document going to come in? Who is going to access it? How is it going to be indexed? And what inboxes are needed in order for you to interact with that document or understand where it is within the workflow process. The image here to the right is a view of our management console. And if you have permission to the management console, you'll be able to see that you can get to the workflow designer below at the bottom here. But you'll also notice everything that we've talked about how to access the DPPs, the inboxes, the index fields, users and groups to assign permission. It's all managed from our management console. So once you have all of this in mind, you're ready to then go into the workflow designer and to start building your workflow. So here's a quick picture of what our workflow designer looks like. And again, I'll show you this live in a second. So again, you open up the workflow designer, it opens up this screen here. And what you'll see is it'll actually open up a blank screen for you to either build a new one or to open an existing. All right, so when we're setting up workflows, let's talk about the demo scenario that we're going to cover. So I had to think about what I wanted to show here. So the thought process is that we've got a general request, maybe a marketing request. We're going to think about how that document is going to come in. In this scenario, we're going to print capture it into Intellichief, which is the ability to use our native print driver to print a document on my desktop into Intellichief. Some other requirements that we have for this is that we only want the person who's bringing this document in to key in a minimal set of data. And from that data, we're then going to enable a lookup to a business system or a database in order to automatically index additional fields. Once we've indexed this document, the next step is to validate that what was indexed is accurate or that the data is there at all. Other steps is that because this is a request process, that user wants to have visibility into the open request so that way they know if and when somebody takes an action on it. And along those lines, we want to have some visible trail to show that any of these requests have either been approved or rejected. A couple of other pieces here. We want to track how many days that this request is outstanding. So if I put a request in and today and it's due next week, then maybe one of the things that the user wants to see is to be able to alert if that request is outstanding for too long before it's due. And lastly, if a request is rejected, we can give the person who's approving or rejecting that request several workflow options that they can take. So you could automatically select from a couple here. We've got maybe it can't be resourced in time, or the request is not in budget. So in order to accomplish this, these are the stages that we're going to utilize in this demonstration. First is a database stage. A database stage is almost what it sounds like. It's our ability to go and read from any business systems database, pull back information based on specific criteria. We can also write to a database as well. A decision stage is, again, the ability to make a specific decision based on specific criteria. If this value is 1, then send this document down a specific path in the workflow. As I mentioned, inbox stages, that's the ability for the user to interact with a document while it's in the workflow process. Lastly here, we've got a reindex stage. One of our concepts that we have is that when you're in workflow, we like to designate it that it's in a workflow. Usually we have the DPP document type as _WF. And then once it's completed the workflow, we drop the WF and archive it, as we call it, as say the marketing request. A set field stage is the ability in the workflow to automatically set a field or a variable within the workflow. And I just noticed here we've got our merge stage, which is kind of hiding out back here. We don't have it listed, but merge stage is the ability for us to merge a visual indicator that the document has been, say, approved or rejected. So there are 12 total stages. So out of those 12, we're going to cover these 6 today. These are the 6 most common. So with that, we can dive in. All right, so first and foremost, what's the document here? So we talked about we need to automate a request process, and that process needs to start with the document. So this is the document. The whole goal is in this process is to automate the request process from marketing in their demo requests, right, as an example. So this is the cover sheet, and we want to automate the process so we're no longer relying on phone calls or emails. Now we can automatically be tracked in Intellichief, and we can get the information to and from the person that needs the information. So for this demo, workflow demo, we're going to use these inboxes. So we have requests to be indexed, request exceptions, requests to be approved, rejected, approved requests, and then anything that's pending approval. So again, these are the inboxes that different users may have depending upon their role in this process. And I'm showing them all under my user here who's creating this that I've called Mark Edding. So there's a little play on words for you. So these are the inboxes. So I have my inboxes defined already. And then if we look here, I have a series of document types that we've called requests. So we have our marketing request here with the workflow tag. That's our best practice of designating documents that are in the workflow process. When they've completed the workflow process, they're going to be in this request marketing document type. And then we also have request marketing delete. Maybe you get requests and they're not followed through and you want to delete those. So we have our document types, we have our inboxes, we know what document we want to process. And so now under those requirements that we kind of laid out before, we have a good sense for the document, the inboxes, and the physical paper that we're trying to, or the electronic paper here that we're trying to automate. So next, the step is to go into our workflow designer. So again, I'm in our management console, and for those of your users who have the right approval, they can get to the management console from the Workbench client. It'll open up here, and then just like our graphic showed, we can go into the workflow designer. So I already have that open, just for expedience sake. So once you're in the workflow designer, it'll open up and it's going to look just like this. If I go into the file, I can either create a new workflow, I can open existing, or I can just display if I don't want to edit. We also have the ability to import and export. But in this case, we're going to develop a new workflow. So when I open this up, the first thing we have to do is name it. My recommendation here is to give it a unique name. What is the business process that you're automating? So in this case, we're going to call this one marketing requests. The next step is you have to designate which DPP or document type you're going to associate with this workflow. So in this case, for our demo here, we're going to choose the request marketing _ workflow. The next step is to utilize one of those inboxes that we have that I had pre-built. In this case, I've created a request exceptions. The reason that we have this request exceptions inbox is think of it as a catch-all, right? So if something in the workflow needs to put the document for somebody to take a look at, it's going to put it in this exceptions inbox, especially if an inbox hasn't been designated in another part of the workflow. And that's it. So now I'm well on my way to creating a workflow. I'm going to expand the screen here. So a little bit about the screen layout. So to the left, we've got the palette of all of our workflow options here. So as we discussed, we're going to use the database, the decision, we're going to use the inbox, the merge, and the reindex and the set. So about half of them. So now you'll notice here off to the top, we have the ability to save our workflow, which I highly recommend. So I'm going to do an initial save. So now I've got a base captured. And then I've got options here to zoom in, zoom out, and these will become basically more important as we start to build this. So you'll notice I can also drag it, so as this workflow starts to get bigger, we can drag it to different areas that we want to see. Now that we're in this, so one of the first things that we said is that we want the user to have to only key in a minimal amount of information. But we also have some validations that we want the system to do to make sure that what is keyed in is accurate. So our workflow is very dynamic. And one of the reasons that it's dynamic is because not only does it work with, say, the static data of a document, but you can also enlist variables, right? And if you think about variables, you don't need to think of it necessarily in the, somebody in the corner writing, development type C# code. It's really a container to store a value or a temporary value. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to start to think a little bit ahead about some of those workflow stages. So we want to validate that some data has been entered into the system, and if it's not, then we want to be able to make a decision based on the state of that variable. So the first thing that I always recommend is, if you've thought about the workflow that you want to create, is to think about the type of data that you're going to need. So because I have a vision of this workflow that I want, I'm going to set up a couple of variables in advance, and I'll show you how those become very useful shortly. So you notice I went to the edit, and then I brought up our variable editor. And now I'm going to create a couple of very simple variables. The first one is I'm going to create a date time variable. And this one we're going to name date bar current date. And the reason, and then you do have to set a default one. So for our purposes, if anything ever went wrong, I want to set this one so that way it's something that's somewhat unique. So 9/9/1999. Now, this variable is important because one of the objectives of this, we said, is that we want to be able to see how long these requests are outstanding. So in order to do that, what we're going to need to do is to know the current date, and we're going to want to be able to calculate how many days until this request is due. So that's why I'm creating this as a variable. All right, the next one that we're going to create is one that's another date variable here. And this one is going to be used to see if the due date for this document was actually entered. So here, this one is just going to be an integer because it's going to be binary. It's either going to be 0 or 1. And so we're going to call this one integer bar. And then apparently I like to repeat myself. And we're going to set this to 0. So basically, it's not set, it's set to 0. And then if it ever changes to another value, that's when we know we've got a different condition. And then the last one we're going to create here is some for our index fields. So we're going to do another var integer. And we're going to use this one because we want to be able to know and check in one of our other stages if the presence of a value is there. And if not, then we're going to change the default value of this variable. So I know this part can seem a little bit daunting. It's actually quite easy. So to reiterate, what I'm doing here is I'm creating these temporary containers in order to store information that I can use or recall later, and then reset this information. And what this is going to allow me to do is to check for the presence of information, say to check for the presence of if one of our index fields has been populated or not. And if it's not populated, then we can set an alert condition and create a notice in the document that this value is missing. So now we've set our variables, which will become useful later. And then now what we're going to do here is the assumption is that somebody just brought this document in. And so what we have to do for each document that goes through is those variables that we just created, we are going to set the initial values. So in order to do that, now that I've created them, I'm going to do a set field stage. And you saw I just dragged from the palette all the way up, and then it automatically opened the palette window. So this one we're going to call Initialize Variables. And quite simply, we're going to go here, and we're going to go to our set field stage, and we're going to set this variable integer here for the one that we created. And we're going to say that this is a constant, and we're going to set it to 1 if a certain condition is met. All right. So what we want to do is we want to find out if our index field that has to be populated by the user is either it has not been set, meaning they didn't put any information in it, or it's some default value that basically equates to I put the document in, but I didn't finish indexing it yet. So what we're going to do here is we're going to build the framework for this. So what we're getting at here is that as you're setting up your your workflow, you set the sort of the foundation layer, right? So what we're doing is we set our variables, and then now we're setting up to check as the document comes into the workflow if the person has configured any index values. Basically, that first condition, check to make sure that the data in the index values has been set before we route it to somebody to approve. We have to make sure that the data is in there and that it's been validated. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say index field 1 that we've got set up, and we're going to say is equal to our special value, like did they complete it or not, null or blank. And then next what we're going to do is to also check if that index value has been set to a default value of unknown, meaning I should have configured something, but I haven't done it yet, and I've left it at this unknown value. And then once I've done that, I've got a completed expression to set the stage. So I can save and close that. So where are we? So we're setting the stage for these variables in order to make a decision and to give a visual indication if this work hasn't been completed. And then I'm going to add one more. I'm going to check to see if the due date has been set. So I've got my var here again. I'm going to choose that other one that I created. And I'm going to say that this is a constant of 1 if this expression is true. And similarly, we're going to do a much simpler one here. We're going to say if due date is equal to null or blank. And that's it. So in the workflow process now, a document's going to enter this workflow. It's going to first go through this initialize variable state. And what it's going to do is it's going to set those variables based on what's been configured in the index values in Intellichief. And if those variables that we set equal to 1, then what we can do is we can set a condition in a set field stage that alerts or sets certain markers associated with that document. So we're going to call this one set document error conditions. And in case if some of you are wondering, am I doing all this from memory? I've actually got a little cheat sheet that I wrote, so that I'm comparing. So again, it's good to write things down and then use that information to build your workflow. So that's exactly what I'm doing. So what I'm doing here is if we come down this workflow path, we're going to set an error condition as an index field in the document that says it's not been indexed. And then on top of that, what we're going to do is we're going to also change the color of the field that specifically should have been indexed but was not. So I'm going to choose a border color, and then we're going to say that this is in an error state because this is a field that has to be completed. And then back to our expression builder here, this set is going to work if that integer that we had created, that variable, is equal to 1. And then similar to that, we're going to do one more because we want to make sure that that due date is also completed as they process the document. Oops. Even if you make a mistake, you can always go back. So, okay, what have we done here so far? So basically what we're saying is that when we start down this path in the workflow, if these variables that we set turn up to be 1 because they haven't met the conditions, then we know that those index values haven't been set by the user when they brought the document in. So we're going to give the user a visual indicator that they haven't completed filling out all of the fields. We're going to set an index value that basically says, hey, you didn't index this document. And then we're going to highlight the specific fields that they need to index. Just like that. So you notice how now we're going down a fork, right? We're going down this this success path here. We're testing, we're going to test for those values. Actually, I made one small mistake. What we have to do is first we have to test those and then set them. So I make a mistake here. So we're going to test those values first. I knew I missed something. I jumped ahead. All right. So what we're doing here is now we're actually going to test those values and then we're going to fork down the right path. So just like we did before, we're going to add another statement here that basically says if one of these variables is equal to 1 or the other is equal to 1, to set it down this arrow path. All right, there we go. That looks better. So now we set the variables based on what's in those values. We're going to test those values. And in this case, we have an else here. For now, I'm just going to link this stage so it always follows this one path. And I did that just by highlighting the little circle here and saying link. And now, regardless of this path, it's still going to go down, follow this. And then, excuse me, if we test and we get any of those values that equal a 1, meaning that they didn't finish doing all of the indexing of the document, then what we're going to do is we're now able to present that document to the user that's going to give them that error indicator that says, hey, you haven't completed indexing this document. And so then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to give it our first inbox stage. So in this case, we're going to say, we're going to give every stage needs a name. We're going to call this one document requires index values. And then the user can see the visual indicators, and then they can take a couple of workflow options that we're going to give them. So request has been, we're going to call this one has been canceled. Maybe they brought it in by mistake, or it's no longer needed. And then we're going to give them another one that basically says, I've completed the indexing. So there are two options. Now, a little best practice here. I always like to put what you want the default response to be for the user. So that user in their inbox response when they're working with this document will have a drop down for these two options. So in this case, the first one they get is going to be this one, meaning they obviously submitted it or somebody submitted it. They need to do their indexing or adding the values to it, and then they're going to choose this option. If we wanted to, we could even make this the default option. And that means then as soon as they open it, it's one less step. They don't have to choose the drop down, select it. Now they can just see this in the window, hit OK. And if they want to cancel it, they'd bring the drop down over and cancel it. So this is a good way to even make the workflow more efficient. Oops, and I didn't set an inbox. All right, so the inbox, where this is going to go, we're going to put this in an inbox that we're calling request to be indexed. So again, we're using the inboxes to identify not only what has to be done, but the state of this particular document type. So I hit OK. So from this point, now, if they're going to delete it, now we don't want to necessarily allow these documents to be deleted, completely expunged from the system. We may want to just change the document type to be a deleted document. So here I'm going to add this reindex. And what a reindex does, it allows me to change the document type. So this document came in as this document for marketing underscore workflow. Now we're going to drop the underscore workflow tag, and this document is going to leave the workflow. Now we have to choose the other DPP that we want to use. In this case, this one's called document, request, sorry. And that's it. That's all I have to do. Now, if I wanted to change any default values, I could, but generally speaking, you want to use the same values that it came in on. And that's what we've done here. So basically, if we follow this path now, we initialize the variables based on what's in the index fields. We test those values. We find out that we've got an error. So we put it into an inbox for the user to finish the indexing. If the user says, oh, I added this by mistake, or otherwise I can cancel it, then we change the document type to deleted, and it leaves the workflow. It's as simple as that. We've got a failure condition here because if for some reason in the system we're unable to reindex it, then what we could do is simply put this into another routine that says we're going to add it to an inbox and say issues on reindex, retry. Oop, and again, I did it again. Now we're going to put this in that exceptions inbox again, because these are situations that are out of the norm of the process. And then from here, once they take that option, now we can link it back so it'll try again. And we hit this link, and then it's going to bring up the selection of available workflow stages that we've created. And we're going to go back to 7, which is this reindex. So what we've done here is they tried to delete the document. If for some reason there was a problem, now we're just looping it back so that way they can try again. But what if they've indexed it and they think everything is good, right? They believe that they have added all of the right values. Do we want to trust them, or do we want to verify again? So our recommendation is that you always want to verify. right? So quite simply here, we can go back and we can recheck those conditions again, or we can reset those. We reset the attributes of the fields. So to do that, we're going to add another set field stage. And this one's going to be called reset error conditions and initialize variables. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to go in here and we're going to take that issue code because they believe that they've indexed it, and we're going to reset it back to blank. So we're not setting an error code here, and we're going to say unconditional. And then we're going to add another one that's basically going to reinitialize that variable, or we're going to now change the the index attributes for all fields back to none. So what we've done so far is, yep, they've indexed it. We need to retest, so we're going to reset some of these conditions back to their default state, so that way, if they pass, they're not erroneously setting off a concern for the user. So next, we have to do the same thing with our variables. That's it. Now, once we've done that, the next step is that we want to run it through the first routine that we had at the beginning to make sure that we can retest all of those values. So what we're simply going to do here is we're going to loop this back to the top, so that way it can rerun through that setup that we already have. So this is an example of how to make your workflows more efficient. Reuse the stages that you already have if they already have the checks or routines that you want to use. So in this case, we're going to put this back to as if it just came in, so we can recheck everything here, and then we're going to do the same thing. Just loop this one back too. So what happens is they think they've done the right thing that they were supposed to. They indexed it. We're going to loop it back to the top because we're going to check those variables again to make sure that they actually did complete the work that they were supposed to. And if they do, then we're going to go down our positive path that says, yeah, we don't have any error conditions, and now we can route it for approval. You see these danglers here. So the same thing. For the purposes of this demo, I'm just looping them back so they take the same process. There's not necessarily anything wrong with doing that because the document will still ensure that it gets all of the right index information that it needs to because of the path that we're taking through the workflow. So now they've indexed all of the basic information that we need them to, but what we said was in our plan is that we also want to automatically look up some values from, say, the ERP. So to do this now, so basically what we're saying here is we don't have any error conditions. They've indexed everything, that they've added all the index values. So now we're going to do a database lookup, and I just drag and drop. So what we're going to do is we're going to say lookup data from business system. And then here we select our data source. So these data sources are configured for the different either business systems or ERP that we're going after where the data is located. So we predefine these. So now what I have to do is I have to say, okay, well, what am I basing this off of? So we're going to say we're basing it off of this field here, index field 1. So this is why it was important first to check and make sure that some of these base values had been completed by the user when they brought the document in. Otherwise, when we go to this stage, if we didn't have this in, we wouldn't be able to automatically index all of the other values that we don't want the user to have to key in manually. So whatever this field is in our database, we're going to return this value. And so this is where a little bit of SQL comes in. You don't have to be, I'm certainly not a guru when it comes to SQL, but you'll find a few commands come in very handy. So first we're going to select whatever's in our database. And I've created a very simple database table. So we're saying whatever's in field 2 from our specific database or database table. So we're going to the database. We're going to select field 2, which represents index field 2 here. We're going to this table in our database, and we're going to say where field 1 equals whatever we have in here. So we hit OK, and if I did this right, now I can test it. And so I just put some generic values in here. So here's my database. Whatever's in this field is going to return in field 2 work type 5. And it did. So now I know that I'm able to test and validate that my SQL query works for this database lookup. And I hit OK. So you notice every time I do this for the different workflow stages, we give you different paths depending upon what that stage returns. So in a database stage, there's really 3 different types of outcomes. Success, meaning I was able to get data back. No data, which means whatever I put in that field 1, there is no corresponding return of the data. Or 3, if I've got a database failure, meaning for some reason the database was down, or maybe there was a connectivity issue. But nonetheless, it allows me to take different paths depending upon the outcome of that return. So next, we're going to go down the positive path here. So now we've got the data. We're going to completely index this document. But again, one of those requirements was for us to automatically include how many days until this request is due. So here, we've got the success path. So I'm actually going to add another database stage here, because what I want to do is I want to fill that other variable that I created to get the current date. And we can do this against the Intellichief database itself. And then here, all we're going to do is we're going to look for that variable that we created for the current date. And this is why I set it up before, because now I can just keep on rolling through when I'm creating this workflow. And then I'm going to say select get date. Again, another little quick SQL command there. Now, if I test it, you can see it's returning today's date. So that's all that variable is there to do. But if I didn't establish it before when I started this workflow, I wouldn't have it available to me now when I need it. So I say, okay. So you see here, now we've got a path here, we've got a path here, we've got a path here. So now what we want to do is we're able to actually calculate how many days until this request is due. So there's a couple of different ways to do this one. I kind of did it using the database route, but what I want to do now is to calculate the number of days till due. So that's what we're going to call the stage. Oops, if I could spell. And then now we have to say what are the input fields. So now we've got a due date that the user populated. And then we've got that variable that we've now populated, which is the current date. And then what we're going to do is we're going to output the value for this other index field which should be days until due. And I'll explain this in a minute. So what we're saying here is we want to calculate the difference in dates between the two we're putting in, and I want the difference referenced in days. So now if we test this and we say that the due date is, let's say it's the 9th, and then the current date is the 23rd, if I did my SQL right, I had it backwards, but you can see here that it'll come back and it'll say it's 16 days. So the reason that it did that is because this one needs to be above that one. Now I'll get the right number. And that's it. So the whole purpose of this arm of the workflow was to make sure we validated the data. Then we come over to this side once all the data has been validated and filled in. Now we're doing all of the calculations because we don't have any basic errors in the document. All on our path to be able to make sure that the person who needs to approve this document can approve it. Now I notice we're coming up on the hour, so I'm going to add one more stage to this, and this is where it goes into an inbox that needs approval, and then I can show you what it looks like when you actually test it. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to add that other inbox stage here, and we're going to call this one document routed for approval. Or we'll call it request routed for approval. And we're going to give this user, well, first, I'm going to remember this time we'll set the inbox. So this is first, it's going to go into in an inbox called to be approved. So the person who approves these could look in this inbox and find all of the requests that need to be approved. And we're going to give them the first option, which is simply to approve the request. Then we're going to give them another one that says the request is rejected. Now, remember in our setup for this, we said that they could only reject these requests for two reasons. One, it's not in budget, so we're going to give them a workflow option to reject it, and then we're going to give them another workflow option for the other reject reason. Resourced. Can't spell today. And then I'm just going to make sure that the order is how we want it. So their first option can be to approve it. The second, it's not in budget. The third is it's not can't be resourced. Then we hit OK, and now notice for each of those options that I gave the user, I've got 3 different paths coming out of that box. So now I can take 3 distinct paths. The other reason why, just to add, is why it can be good to give users options in the workflow that are seemingly the same. Because in our analytics, you could actually take these workflow responses and now specifically generate a report that says this user rejected this request, and the most common rejection requests are because they're not in budget. So now I can even generate a better analytics report because of the options and the error checking that I'm doing in workflow. And now I'll even allow me to, improve my process even more so than building the best process here. I can now figure out upstream, why are they all getting rejected? Well, they're not in budget. Well, maybe now there's another workflow we can create. How do we validate the budget first, right? So these things all kind of layer together. All right, so what we're going to do for the time being here is I'm going to leave this right here where it is. I'm going to save it. And saving it ensures that everything that I've done here is good. Now, would I leave a workflow like this and go into production? No, because I've got all these kind of loose ends that we have to tie together. We do have the ability to validate the workflow here, and it'll show you if there are problems and allow you to dig in further. But I have enough here that I can at least start to test, almost like a unit test, to make sure that my workflow is progressing as it should. So now the other thing you have to remember to do is you've created the world's best workflow for your business process. We've tagged the DPP to the workflow, but you also have to do the same thing here. So we need to go into that request workflow, and you'll notice when we open this up that, oops, I opened up the wrong one. I should wear my glasses more often. We have this request marketing workflow DPP here. You'll notice I have a workflow. You have to remember to set the workflow. So here we're going to make it as marketing requests. The other marketing is the one I previously created. And that's it. So now I've tied the workflow to the DPP and the DPP to the workflow. So now we can test this. So our goal here, again, is we're going to bring in this request, this marketing request. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to just use Intellichief print capture. To bring this in. And I just restarted my system, so this will take a second. What it's doing in the background is I selected print capture. It's going to go validate what options I have to print capture this document to in order to present me with the right options. Oops, and in this case, I've already got it configured. I'm not going to configure anything else. Let's see if I created my workflow correctly. So it's coming in with this default value of unknown. Maybe I want to get this in real quick, and all I do is hit save. And that's it. This document is now on its way into Intellichief. So now again, if I built this right, this should pop up in one of these inboxes, and it is. You see here, this count on this request to be indexed went to 1. And you'll notice that it highlighted that I didn't have a due date, but it did give me this error condition that says this is an unindexed document. So now here, I'm going to add the date. While I'm at it, I'm also going to add this field here. So one of the things to highlight here is I did something a little bit wrong maybe, because you'll notice that I was supposed to highlight not only this field, but also this field. Because I wanted to show the user both fields that needed to be filled out. So this is why I can't stress enough is to document it, test it, and you can even test the individual stages by putting a document through until you make sure that you get it right and configured. But in either case, this isn't going to prevent us from moving forward. So now I'm going to go here. I'm going to choose my options now. Remember those options we configured. We have a document it has been indexed, and we want to release it for approval routing. I hit confirm. And now this should go to the request to be approved. And then from here, it says it's due today, basically. It subtracted the current date from the date that it's due, and I got 0. And then it automatically added this index field. So I didn't add this. I didn't add this field. I just added the 2 fields as the user that I needed to configure, and I was able to get the information. Now here, if I had stubbed out these options, but here are those 3 options as the approver that I can choose from. I can either approve it, I can reject it, or it's rejected, or it's rejected because it's I can't resource it. The other thing to highlight here, and then I know we're running a bit long, but is to show you that every step of the way that our document goes through is also in the history. So for those of you who are in Intellichief every day, this history, this is a complete audit of this document from the moment it came in all of the way to present time. So you can see I brought it in, Mark brought it in through print capture. It was brought it in without any index fields. You can see the system in the workflow processes it went through. Then Mark went in, he viewed it, saved it, added index values, and then it went back through the workflow. So from a user perspective and audit perspective, you've got all of the information to know exactly what's going on with your document and every step that it's going through in the workflow from our history. So I know we're coming right up on the hour, so hopefully, to kind of wrap this up and then maybe take some questions, is the goal here was to demonstrate that in an hour's time frame, I built a workflow mostly that you can use on a business process. What I needed to know is I needed to know what index values were important, what ones we wanted to validate that the user put in correctly, what error conditions we wanted to check for, and then what we needed to do to get out, right? So the whole goal of this exercise was to show that you could put a request in, you can route it for approval, you can give visibility into that document through the entire workflow process, and then ultimately the document in the workflow support your business process. And now you've got all the audit history to show that your process is being followed, and you've got the visibility to know who acted on a document and when. So I hope you all have enjoyed this, and I know we're a bit over, but if there are questions, I'd be happy to take them. I just have to figure this out a little bit. Oh, okay. So I don't see any questions. If there are any, either I don't see them or please feel free to ask them. So one question that came up was, can we get a copy of the slides? I believe that both the recording and the slides will be available, but I will make certain I circle back with our team here to make sure the information is available to you all. Any other questions, comments? I'll give it one more minute. If not, then I think we can wrap it up. And I do appreciate your time and your patience. And I hope this was rewarding for you to learn how with a little bit of information, you can build some pretty good workflows. All right, one more minute. One of the things I will show in this 1 minute, so if I close this workflow, the workflow that I built to test this and to make sure I was doing it right was actually right below this one. So if you wanted to see what the completed one looked like, this is it. So you can see everything that we did, I kind of redid here. And then the other thing that if we would have had time for it, is I even added rubber stamps to show visibly if a document was approved or rejected along the path, including some other paths to route it back to the user if the request had been rejected. If there aren't any additional questions, you have my information. I'm more than happy to speak to anybody one-on-one. Feel free to use my contact information. That's why I publish it. And I'd love to hear from you. So please reach out if you have any other questions or anything else I can assist you with. Otherwise, thank you for the time. I appreciate it and look forward to speaking with you in the future. If I can figure out how to